Thank you, Josh and Mickey, for the very informative dialogue on the stage. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Yasufumi Hirai. In my capacity as the Senior Advisor for Japan Association of New Economy, I'd like to introduce the next keynote speaker. Today, we have Drew Houston, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Dropbox. Obviously, he is one of the most distinguished entrepreneurs in the world by innovating the online storage service. On MIT's commencement address back in 2013, he was quoted as saying that I stopped trying to make my life perfect and instead tried to make it interesting because we have only 30,000 days in our life. This is a very profound message for me. Today, we might hear from him not only about how his innovative cloud service business is growing, but also about how he has been making his life more interesting and amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Drew Houston on the stage. Have a seat. So from now on, I'd like to hand this over to George Nishiyama as an interviewer. Present the session.
Okay, so Drew, it's great to have you here today,
It's great to be here.
and I think it's a great time to be in Tokyo with the cherry blossoms in full bloom.
Yes.
I know you're a fan of many things Japanese, and you've been here quite a lot recently. Last fall, you came here to open up your Tokyo office, and you had some announcements about Japan this morning. So I want to start off by asking you about your plans here, how you see Dropbox changing the way Japanese people work and/or play.
Yeah. So yeah, it's great to be back. We opened up our office in Tokyo about 6 months ago, and just things have been growing. And the news we shared this morning is we just announced a partnership with SoftBank, where we're putting together a program to reach 1 million Dropbox for Business customers together in our partnership over the next 5 years. And we can talk more about that. But Japan has always been a really great market for us. And in fact, the first article that was ever posted about Dropbox by an IT news site came from Japan. So it was a /Japan article. So we've always been grateful for the support.
How do you see Japanese users? Are they any different from users elsewhere? As you said, I think a lot of users of Dropbox are actually outside of the US. Anything particular about the Japanese users?
I think that the example I gave, people were onto Dropbox very early in Japan. So in Japanese, I think there's a lot of love for technology here. And it's exciting for us because we're always trying to make new things. And Japan, they've been quick to try a lot of the new things that we've done. But we look at the numbers too. And so some of the stats that we find interesting are that people in Japan who are active on Dropbox save a lot more files, or they just use the product a lot more than the US, or than really much more than average. And that's great for us because then people who use the product more tend to pay, and that's true around the world. But there are a lot of attractive aspects about it. And SMBs, or small businesses, are most of the workforce is employed by small businesses here, and Dropbox is a really great fit for that. And everyone here is really mobile and loves technology and has a bunch of different devices. And so I think we've been excited to be a part of that, and we want to help more there to give people the freedom to work everywhere. And we have a lot more things that we're working on.
You see more room to grow here. I know you've surpassed a certain threshold here. But do you see that growing more, or?
Yeah, there's a lot more. So we're almost at 10 million users in Japan. Until we reach everyone, we still have work to do. But we're very happy with that progress, and it's growing. And absolutely, I think both getting Dropbox customers as individuals, and we've been putting a lot of effort lately into attracting businesses to Dropbox, and the model that what we have the model we have that works around the world is really effective here too.
Okay. You know, I think many people here, especially, you know, they're familiar with Dropbox, and I think, but let's say, you know, 5 years ago, maybe they weren't. But now you see, you know, people who are not so familiar with Dropbox. They know Google Docs. They would know, you know, iCloud. You know, it comes with their iPhone. So that gets me to my next question, which is, you know, how do you differentiate with these giants, so to speak, that have come into the online storage sort of sector? How do you, you know, differentiate yourself with those the bigger players?
Well, our focus has always been on the user experience and on supporting every platform. And so there's certainly a lot of different cloud services out there. And I think what you're going to find is, you know, for the most part, you're not going to choose one or the other, but you'll sort of end up having accounts on all of them, which is itself kind of, you know, a new kind of challenge. But, you know, you might use iCloud for finding your iPhone. You might use Google Docs for your real-time docs, and then hopefully you're using Dropbox for your files or for your Office documents or for your photos. And so our approach has been to look at what people are really doing when they put something in Dropbox. Because it's more than just backup, right? The whole reason you put something in Dropbox is usually to then to share it, right? If you put a photo in Dropbox, this is how you remember your life, or this is how you get closer to the people you really care about. Or if you're putting in all your documents at work, it's probably because you have a project and people you're collaborating with. And so we think about, you know, it's much more than just storage or files. It's how do we make that information useful? How do we bring it all together? How do we make it available? You know, and how do we make it so you don't have to worry about whether you're on your, you know, iPad or your Android phone or your PC or Mac? Giving people that freedom and building a really great experience has always been our focus, and I think people love that, or when our users tell us that they stay on Dropbox because it's easy and it just works.
So you say the user experience is what would set you apart from the others?
Yeah, we hear that a lot, and we're always making it better. And so, and last year was a big year for us in terms of launching, or really solving these problems in new and better ways. And sometimes that's improving the Dropbox app. And so if you look at, or what are the most popular things people do on Dropbox, one thing is collaborate on Office documents. And so we've done things from improving our own app and adding things like the Dropbox badge, which we announced and is rolling out, that makes your PC version of, or your desktop version of Office collaborative, gives you some of the benefits that you might get from something like Google Docs without having to change or learn a new tool. We actually partner with Microsoft itself so that Dropbox support is built into Office and vice versa. So it's a really seamless experience going back and forth between Dropbox and Office. And we also have launched new apps. So some of you may use Mailbox, which is a better way of handling your email on your phone and now your computer. And apps like Carousel, which is basically lets you have your whole life, every photo you've ever taken in your pocket wherever you go. And it's all stored in the cloud, so you don't actually run out of space on your phone. And I know that's been really a pain point for me, is just as you're taking this video of something awesome, your phone runs out of space. And so we try to find those problems that all of us run into and eliminate them, and sort of take a lot of the frustration and friction out of these everyday things.
You mentioned Mailbox. So the next question that I have is, you know, so we just talked about how to deal with the so-called giants, but on the other hand, you have, you know, new startups. You know, you were often referred to as, you know, one of the promising or the top 30 and under entrepreneurs, and I think now you're 32.
I'm an old man now.
And so maybe, you know, it's no longer probably right to call Dropbox a startup. So how do you deal with the new startups, maybe the next Drew Houston? You know, how do you stay ahead of them, and how do you stay on top?
I mean, the first thing is we get just as excited as everyone else about the new ideas that people have. And, you know, building a company is hard. And, you know, there's a lot more pieces that have to fall into place beyond just building a product. I mean, you have to build infrastructure, you have to find a way to reach a lot of users, you have to find a business model that works, you have to raise money. And what we found is we've been able to partner, we've been able to bring founders and great companies into Dropbox, and we basically give you a huge playground. Because overnight, a lot of these problems that you'd otherwise have to solve yourself are just taken care of by the other people we have on the team. And you can just focus on building a great product and know that everything you do, you know, you can just press a button and we have hundreds of millions of users and you're going to be reaching a lot of people with the things that you build. So we're really proud of our track record for bringing founders and companies into Dropbox, and we're always on the lookout for good ideas and ways that we can accelerate their growth.
Would that mean, as you did with Mailbox, you know, perhaps acquisitions? You know, there's this famous story about you being invited to Apple and the meeting with Steve Jobs, but do you see yourself now in that role?
Well, I think, you know, there are a lot of startups that also plug into Dropbox, and startups that are doing really well. So companies, it doesn't have to be an acquisition. There are great companies like Slack. You know, there's there's something like 300,000 applications that plug into Dropbox, big and small. But yeah, every now and then something comes along where we get really excited about it, and the founders and we understand a path where together we can make something happen at a much bigger scale faster.
I want to change the subject a bit, but since we're talking about storage, I think one of the big issues for online storage these days is security. You know, we had the case of Edward Snowden overseas, and I think in Japan, it wasn't so much online storage, but a lot of you know, leakage of private information. That's been a big issue here. How would Dropbox counter arguments that you know, online storage isn't safe, that you need to actually have it with you?
Well, actually, I think we're now seeing that having your stuff in the cloud is a much better home for it, right? The same way that in the beginning, maybe we would put all our cash under the bed, right? But a bank is going to do a much better job of keeping you safe. And I think you're starting to see this with a lot of the high-profile security issues that some of these companies have had. I mean, they're just not, you know, if you're a retailer, you're not in the business of security. And we're fortunate, and you know, companies that operate at scale, we can attract some of the smartest and best engineers in the world because we can give them a mission like, look, you're going to keep hundreds of people, millions of people's stuff safe. You know, we can hire all our smart friends from school and, you know, hire people who built the security teams at Google. And so we build a really big security team, but then there's all kinds of things you have to do, from features in the product, like things like two-factor authentication, having the right sharing controls, to all these technical details under the hood, to working with other internet companies like Google and joining together and figuring out, okay, is there a way that's better than having to memorize 1 million passwords to keep your information safe on the internet in general? And so it's a big challenge, but we have, you know, we are going to, companies like Dropbox, we will certainly invest a lot more in security because our business runs on trust.
Is there anything special about Japan that you would do? Because I think the sense of, you know, the concerns towards security here, especially I think, you know, the established bigger firms, is very strong, to say the least. And I don't know if you have any sort of ideas to sort of alleviate or, you know, assure them that Dropbox is actually safe.
I think every company kind of is going through this progression, and they'll go at a different pace, and certainly, you know, maybe bigger companies in Japan are more sensitive or more worried about it, but, you know, this happens with adoption of new technology in general, where, you know, anything financially, or financial institutions or any kind of regulated institution or health or medical, people will adopt these things in different phases. So we see our job as just helping people understand that actually when you ban something like Gmail or Dropbox, you might just force people to use things like thumb drives, which are actually way worse. And when you look at a lot of these high-profile incidents, they've involved the company's own infrastructure getting compromised. And so a lot of those companies would be in a much better place if their information were in the cloud. So we'll get there, but it takes time.
I want to move on to a bit to I think what the audience here wants to hear the most about, which is your early days or how you got here. You've talked about, I think, the fact that you are the average of your closest five people around you. So I want to get to that issue. And so who would you say influenced you? I think there's a lot of interest in education here, the need for the Japanese system to change. Related to that, did you have like a role model, maybe your parents, or the influence of education? How do you see all that, affecting you?
Well, I feel like I was lucky in a bunch of ways. When I was a little kid and I was walking around my living room when I was 3, my parents had a PC, and so I got a very early start, and that was really helpful. And I had a story that's probably similar to, I imagine many of you in the audience, where I did internships. But when I was lucky, I kind of stumbled into startups and ended up working as an intern or an engineer for these really small companies near where I lived in Massachusetts. And so I could start to learn very early on what that was like, and it was really fun. You have a whole bunch of people who all fit in a room together, and you just figure everything out. And so certainly the founders of those companies where I worked were big influences on me, and they're still friends of mine. The other students I studied engineering with a lot of smart kids at MIT, and they became, a lot of them are still my closest friends and have gone on to start companies. And then one of the great things about now is, I think there's been more great information written and published about how to start a company in the last 10 years than maybe in the last 1,000 years, right? And so I think people are really doing a great job of writing about their experiences. I think all over the world there's a culture of entrepreneurs wanting to help other entrepreneurs. I know Mikitani-san has been very supportive and investing in the next generation of great entrepreneurs here in Japan. And so, I think that my experience was very similar, having people that were supportive and drawing inspiration from a lot of different people over time.
So you still listen to these people, talk to them regularly, and see them as kind of mentors?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, starting a company is hard. And so I think, especially, and one of the great things about conferences like this is you can get all the people who are interested in starting companies and actually doing it together. And that was one of the big benefits that I got from moving to San Francisco. Suddenly I'm surrounded by people who are interested in the same thing. A lot of them have been through it before and could teach me different things. And I think we all try to pay it forward and help the next round of entrepreneurs. So I don't do a lot, but I've done some angel investing and try to advise people and be helpful too.
Right. One of the things that you did prior to Dropbox was Accolade. And I wanted to sort of ask you a bit about how you saw the difference between that and what you do now. I think Accolade itself was quite, it was successful on its own, but I think you saw that there was something different. And if you could, tell us about that, I think they would appreciate that.
Yeah, so Accolade was my first company. And I'm sure most of us in this room have had the joy of preparing for standardized tests of some form. And in the US, the one we take is the SAT. And it was really frustrating for me because everybody would learn from these 800-page books, and you'd have to grade it yourself, and you'd have to go to a classroom at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and listen to someone read from a different book about how to do it. And I'm like, God, there should be a website for this, right? This will all move online, because then I can move at my own pace, and there'll be all these things. So it was, I think the idea was reasonable, but, everybody has their first company. Now looking back, I see all these things that we did wrong. We didn't want to raise any money. We were very inefficient. I would spend a lot of weekends and late nights writing, questions about parallel lines or, analogies or, trains leaving the station at different times. And so I kind of burned out on that pretty quickly. Right. But the good part of that was I started this during school, so I got just be a founder at age 21. and sort of start the clock really early. And so all of these things, when I would go read all these books and talk to people, I would start learning all this information and applying it instead of just kind of thinking about it in the abstract. And so I think getting an early start, there's no optimal path. And so I think just starting the clock early, I can't really think of too many entrepreneurs that really, even the ones you think of that seem to have succeeded the first time around, like, Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, like they had that new project was just one thing in a series of other projects that that didn't take off to the same degree.
I could easily understand, sort of burning out, thinking of, 100 ways to, 100 questions about parallel lines. But
triangles. I can tell you all about, Pythagorean theorem.
Right. But why is it that, you didn't burn out, or you still haven't burned out with Dropbox? What's that difference between those two things?
Well, I did burn out on Accolade to some extent, and I could sort of tell because I kept coming up with these other side projects. One of them was a poker bot. And what a poker bot is it's sort of if any of you play poker online, you click the mouse and you bet and you do things like that. But a poker bot means you can design an algorithm to do that for you. So I did that for a while, and it was sort of kind of this magical thing where the mouse would move itself, or the pointer would move itself, and there would be a bug and I'd lose all my money and things like that. But it worked. It was cool. And then Dropbox was like kind of the next side project because I was working on this company. I had to work across a bunch of different computers. I kept forgetting my thumb drive. My co-founder and I didn't work in the same place, so we'd always be emailing things back and forth, and we'd screw it up. And just sort of paper cut after paper cut and frustration after frustration, where I'm like, God, I'm going to start working on this. I only have one customer, and it's me. And worst case scenario, I will have a problem that I've solved. And that was kind of enough in the beginning, but then I realized, this is a problem that the whole world was going to have. Or the idea that your stuff should follow you around everywhere had been around since my parents were kids, but it was just nobody had really built it.
So, I think many of the people here are, they're aspiring entrepreneurs themselves, and I think, there are many objectives. They've got their own sort of agenda, but what is your advice to them, to sort of, what is it that would keep them driving and going? Accolade, of course, you thought there was a reason to do that, but you burned out fairly quickly. That wasn't the case with Dropbox, and I think that personal experience that you just mentioned was quite, played an important role. So what is it that would keep you going? And
yeah, whenever I did these side projects, I just felt this pull, like I could really get obsessed with an idea. And I just, it was the same feeling where there was the poker bot and later Dropbox. I studied computer science, and I love distributed systems and algorithms and all these things I would study. And Dropbox was like this playground where we could actually put those things to use and build something that a lot of people could eventually use. And so I think but at first I felt guilty. It was kind of odd, right? Because in the beginning, I would be taking time away from my studies. These side projects were taking time away from Accolade. But that pull was like really strong with Dropbox. And eventually, instead of trying to quiet that voice down, I would actually listen to it. And so I think all of it, hopefully, we all find things over time that we can really become obsessed with. And I think that's the starting point, because it's not always fun. And it's just a lot of, the more I've learned about it, the more it's just a lot of kind of hard work and trying to figure things out. But if you really love what you're doing, and over time, or the sort of mission of Dropbox has changed from sort of solve a problem for myself to then now we get to think about, okay, how do we build this home for everyone's most important information, for hundreds of millions of people? How do we solve these problems better and better and better? For better or worse, competing with Google, Apple, Amazon, all these companies is kind of a dream come true. The bad news is we're competing with Google and Apple and Amazon, and they're very. Your reward at each step is a much bigger and better and more fierce competitor. But I think that's part of the fun of it.
Right. The last point that I want to touch on is, I think people about my age and up, maybe they're a minority here, but we often look back at Japan and we talk about the lost decade or decade and a half, and how I think when we were kids, we saw the Sony Walkman, and we were thrilled by that. Excuse me. We thought it was a game changer. It really changed the way we consume music. 20 or 30 years later, we have the iPhone. So I think there's a feeling here that Japan hasn't really come up with that next game changer. I think online storage is certainly one. What is your prescription for Japan? And people also say that I think in the previous session it came up as well that Japan has this strength in manufacturing and almost like an artisan sort of obsession with attention to detail and those things. So Japan could play to those strengths. How would you see? I mean, what's your advice for Japan in terms of the industry and going forward?
Well, I think first of all, every great company gets disrupted at some point, and so Sony's not alone. I mean, I think we can all think of examples. I think there are a bunch of ingredients, right? If you want to build a startup ecosystem, you need a lot of the basics, right? You need it helps to have great schools and sort of engineering talent. People can build things. It helps to have investment, and it's great that's growing here. It helps to have people who have already done it, and sort of people who can be mentors or angel investors, or who can be leaders in the next generation of companies that you can hire. And I think and then there's the government can help by making it easier to do business. By encouraging people to be able to move between jobs, things like that, and that's kind of the foundation. And then every country, every city, kind of wrings its hands, wondering how can we be like Silicon Valley. And I think it's in part by building a great foundation, but then also playing to your strengths. And so when you talk about strengths in manufacturing or robotics, I mean, a lot of what this room is excited about are things like the Internet of Things, right? Or robotics. All these advances in machine learning, machine vision, robotics are going to transform how we work, are going to transform industries. And so I wouldn't just try to sort of copy a recipe that, just hoping that by doing the same thing it'll work. I would, there are new waves coming every few years of really big opportunities, and I would grab onto the ones that play to those strengths. And so thinking about Internet of Things or 3D printing, manufacturing, I think Japan has a lot more. I think there's a lot of other countries that are in way worse shape than Japan.
Right. Okay. I think we should be opening up to the floor now for questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and limit yourself first to one question and no statements, please, just questions. A hand mic will, okay. Gentleman in the front, over there, with the glasses, please.
じゃあ私からいいですかね。はい。
If I may ask that question, when I hear about the United States, I hear that people who have failed repeatedly are highly evaluated. People who may have failed are highly evaluated. And I would like to inquire Mr. Houston's thoughts about this. And how many failures did you yourself experience is what I would like to ask.
I think there's a view that in the U.S., the more you fail, that actually, people value that, and that's the first question. And the other question is, your own failure experiences. If you could talk about that.
Well, I think you can't start something new if you already know the outcome. Then you're probably not starting something new, right? And so, of all the things that get tried, a lot are going to fail. And as far as how to build that acceptance into a culture, I think it's role models. I think it's people. I think some of the best examples are when entrepreneurs and hopefully entrepreneurs wherever they come from or entrepreneurs in Japan can stand up and talk about, hey, here are these things that I did and they didn't work, but now you only have to get it right once, right? And then you're a hero.
Right.
And I think you can build that culture, that acceptance, if you have kind of role models who are willing to stand up and sort of talk about the reality. Because again, if you're only going to take swings, or if you're only going to pursue ideas that you know are going to work, chances are everybody else has already pursued them.
Right, right. Did you have a particular role model?
I mean, I think there's amazing things about each of the big. I mean, probably, or like growing up, Bill Gates was a huge role model, but actually even before really knowing I wanted to start a business, I thought I wanted to make computer games. Because when I was little, I would just be on the computer playing games, and then I wanted to make my own games, and so that's when I learned to program, and then that's what I thought I was going to do. Unfortunately, and then I learned that there's other interesting things out there too. But then I got excited about just the story of Microsoft and Bill Gates, and I think a lot of people my age and others are inspired by him, and there's a lot of great things about the whole generation of internet entrepreneurs.
Okay. Next question. In the back, in that row, right there. Yeah. Yeah, if you could keep your hand up. Yep, over there, yes.
Thank you for your wonderful keynote speech. I am a high school senior in Tokyo, and I was really inspired by your speech. And I wanted to ask you, right now I'm really in the middle of those standardized tests you were mentioning, and I really have to make difficult decisions. And I was wondering, what has been your most difficult decision, including your time maybe at MIT or in Dropbox? What has been your most difficult decision?
Well, I would say get good scores on those standardized tests. That's time well spent. I'm really glad I got into a good school because that, and actually I'm glad I didn't drop out of school. I didn't drop out of college. My co-founder did. That's another story. But I got my degree. My parents would have been very unhappy if I had dropped out of MIT. But I think school is a great experience, and I don't think you have the rest of your life to start great companies. So I think, and you can learn a lot about startups just by joining a startup or getting these early experiences without having to drop everything and try to start your first company. As far as difficult decisions, eventually they're all about people, right? And I think the real challenge is you build a company alongside friends, right, who have contributed a lot to the company, and for whatever reason, sometimes it's rare, but it happens when something's not working out, or they're not contributing the way they were before, and they're not happy and you're not happy, and so the hard people decisions, having to let people go, being too slow about people decisions. I think most entrepreneurs would point to those as the hardest moments.
Okay, one more question. Okay, man. Let me see if there's a woman. Any ladies with questions? No. I'm sorry, I can't see. Okay, man in the white, gentleman there in the white shirt.
Thank you for the opportunity. So for young entrepreneurs, how should they behave? And for the Japanese young entrepreneurs, what do they need to succeed in the global market? So your views on this. So a couple of words. Again, a message for the young entrepreneurs.
For success for young entrepreneurs, especially in Japan.
Well, I think, when I look back at the most valuable things, or the things that end up being the most helpful, it's some of the things I mentioned, which are just getting an early start, not waiting for the perfect idea or perfect situation to come along, surrounding myself with people that push me to be better, so that kind of friendly competition with my friends, being around people who are also starting companies and learning from them. And then really one of the big things that I did, which I don't hear that much about, is I read a lot of books. If you want, I think I read probably 100 business books in college because I realized that I didn't know anything about sales or marketing or management or all these other things that I knew how to program and I knew how to build the products to some extent, but I didn't know any of this other stuff. And so, to this day, I love reading about the history of business and the stories of these companies as they were built. And you start to see patterns with a lot of these things. And the stories outside of business, how do you get groups of people to do something great? And that happens in the military, it happens in government, it happens in sports. But I think reading is really underrated. And I've got a lot of books that I can think of that have really helped me.
I think time has come, and we're running a bit behind. So thank you very much all for listening, and please, a big round of applause for Drew, please. Thank you.
Thank you.